Imagine being willing to die for a country that refused to see you as equal. Imagine preparing to fight the most terrifying war in human history while being told, repeatedly and officially, that you were inferior by birth, that your mind was not sharp enough, your emotions not stable enough, and your character not strong enough to fly an airplane into combat. This is not a metaphor. This was the reality for thousands of Black Americans in the early 1940s. And for a small group of men who refused to accept that reality, the sky itself became a battlefield for dignity, truth, and survival. In 1940s America, segregation was not merely social. It was systemic, enforced by law and tradition. Jim Crow dictated where Black Americans could live, work, eat, learn, and even dream. While the United States spoke boldly about freedom and democracy, its own armed forces remained rigidly segregated. African Americans were largely confined to service roles, denied opportunities to fight, lead, or prove themselves in combat. Nowhere was this exclusion more pronounced than in military aviation. Flying was considered the pinnacle of skill, intelligence, and heroism, and many in power believed Black men were incapable of it. These beliefs were not whispered opinions. They were written into military reports and reinforced by so-called scientific studies claiming African Americans lacked the mental capacity to operate complex machinery. The idea of Black fighter pilots was treated as absurd, even dangerous. Yet as war spread across Europe and the Pacific, the United States faced an undeniable truth. It needed pilots. And it needed them fast. Civil rights organizations, particularly the NAACP, applied relentless pressure on the Roosevelt administration. They argued that if Black Americans were expected to fight and die for their country, they must be allowed to serve in meaningful roles. Public opinion slowly shifted, not because prejudice disappeared, but because necessity demanded compromise. And so, reluctantly, the U.S. Army Air Corps approved an experiment. Not a commitment, not a belief. An experiment designed to test whether Black men could be trained as military pilots. That experiment was Tuskegee. Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama was chosen deliberately. Located in the segregated South, it ensured racial boundaries remained firmly intact. The program was underfunded, over-scrutinized, and burdened with impossible expectations. Failure was assumed. Every mistake would confirm what many already believed. Every success would be questioned, minimized, or ignored. The men who arrived at Tuskegee understood the stakes immediately. They were not simply cadets. They were representatives of an entire race standing trial before a nation. The pressure was suffocating. Training was brutal, both academically and physically. Aerodynamics, navigation, meteorology, mechanics, subjects designed to overwhelm even the most prepared students. Washout rates were high, and instructors watched closely, waiting for confirmation of failure. Beyond the classroom, the obstacles multiplied. Equipment shortages were common. Aircraft were often outdated. Some instructors were openly hostile, convinced the program was a waste of resources. Yet what these men lacked in institutional support, they compensated for with discipline, focus, and an unbreakable sense of purpose. Many came from humble backgrounds. Some were college-educated. All shared the same understanding. Success was not optional. They were flying not just for themselves, but for millions of Black Americans who had been told for generations that certain heights were forbidden. Slowly, undeniably, something extraordinary happened. The cadets didn't merely survive training, they excelled. They mastered flight maneuvers others said they couldn't comprehend. They logged hours, passed exams, and earned wings. Against all expectations, the experiment refused to fail. By the time they formed the 332nd Fighter Group, these men were no longer symbols of doubt. They were symbols of possibility. Their aircraft bore a distinctive red paint on the tail, a simple marking that would soon become legendary. The Red Tails were preparing to enter the war, and nothing would ever be the same. When the Tuskegee Airmen arrived in Europe, they entered a world defined by fire, fear, and relentless violence. The air war over Nazi-occupied territory was among the deadliest theaters of World War II. Bomber crews flew deep into enemy airspace, knowing that many would never return. German fighter aces stalked the skies, while flak tore through formations with terrifying precision. Escort fighters were the difference between life and death. For the Tuskegee Airmen, The burden was heavier than for any other unit. They carried the weight of skepticism into combat. Some white bomber crews openly doubted them. Others requested reassignment rather than fly under their protection. Every mission became a test, not only of skill, but of legitimacy. The Red Tails understood this reality with painful clarity. They knew one mistake could erase years of progress. So they adopted a philosophy that would define their legacy: discipline over glory. While other fighter units often chased enemy aircraft for personal kill counts, the Tuskegee Airmen stayed close to the bombers. Their mission was protection, and they treated it as sacred. Mission after mission, they flew with relentless focus. They held formation. They resisted temptation. And when German fighters attacked, they responded with precision and ferocity. Enemy pilots quickly learned that bombers guarded by red-tailed fighters were not easy prey. The results were extraordinary. Over hundreds of escort missions, the Tuskegee Airmen achieved one of the most remarkable records of the war, rarely losing a bomber to enemy fighters while under their protection. This was not coincidence. It was the product of training, restraint, and an unwavering commitment to their duty. In the chaos of aerial combat, prejudice evaporates. Only skill remains. And in those skies, the Tuskegee Airmen proved themselves equal to any unit in the Army Air Forces. They downed enemy aircraft, destroyed rail lines, strafed installations, and brought bomber crews home alive. Yet recognition remained elusive. Official reports often minimized their accomplishments. Praise was slow and restrained. But among those who flew beside them, the truth was undeniable. Bomber crews began requesting the Red Tails. Trust replaced doubt. Respect replaced prejudice. By the time the war ended, the Tuskegee Airmen had rewritten what was thought possible. They had not merely participated in the war, they had reshaped its narrative. Victory abroad did not mean equality at home. When the Tuskegee Airmen returned to the United States, many were greeted by the same segregation they had left behind. They could wear uniforms covered in medals and still be denied service at restaurants. They had defeated fascism, yet racism remained deeply entrenched. But something had changed. Their record was undeniable. Their service became a powerful argument against segregation. Civil rights leaders pointed to their achievements as proof that exclusion was built on lies, not facts. In 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, officially desegregating the United States Armed Forces. It was a turning point in American history. And while the order did not erase racism overnight, it marked the beginning of irreversible change. The Tuskegee Airmen had helped force the nation to confront its contradictions. For decades, their story remained largely untold. Many lived quiet lives, rarely speaking of the war. Only later did recognition begin to catch up with reality. Medals were awarded. Documentaries produced. In 2007, the Tuskegee Airmen received the Congressional Gold Medal, honoring not just their service, but their impact on American history. Today, their legacy lives on in every integrated cockpit, every diverse military unit, and every individual who refuses to accept imposed limitations. They were not simply pilots. They were pioneers. They were not merely soldiers. They were catalysts for change. The Tuskegee Airmen proved that courage has no color, excellence has no boundaries, and history is shaped by those who dare to rise when the world insists they remain grounded. And the red tails still fly, forever etched into the soul of a nation. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, like the video and subscribe the channel to help me. Thanks.